I love it. Under the sea. Like a regular Barracuda, but only more acidic. What's up everyone? Today I want to talk about Super Metroid, released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo. Now for those of you who may not know, Super Metroid is a side-scrolling action-adventure game which defined a genre of video games in combination with Castlevania. This led to an entire genre called Metroidvania. Super Metroid features a large world, which is unlocked section by section by beating bosses and collecting new abilities. But it's so much more than just that. There's also invisible walls, destroyable objects, collapsing walls, and even Mickey Mouse references.
I make money! Ha!
As many of you already know, Super Metroid features a bounty hunter named Samus Aran who goes through an amazing evolution when you consider how much she evolves throughout the game. There's a ton of upgrades. The first upgrade we get is the Morph Ball, which allows Samus to move in small tunnels. The second upgrade we see in the game is the Bombs, which allows Samus to destroy items while in the Morph Ball form. And then late in the game, we get an upgrade called the Spring Ball, which allows Samus to jump while in the Morph Ball form. Samus will also receive 2 suit upgrades during her adventure. The first is the Varia suit, which allows her to traverse Upper Norfair where she would normally burn up. After that we get the Gravity suit, which allows Samus to move freely in water. There's also a variety of beam upgrades throughout the game. The first is the Charge Beam, which of course allows us to charge our beam for extra damage. After that there's the Spazer Beam, which spreads the beam wider for effect, and after that we have the Wave Beam, which allows our shots to phase through objects. There's also an Ice Beam, which somehow freezes enemies in midair, and after that we have the Plasma Beam, which significantly increases our damage.
Nope. Surprise, motherfucker.
And lastly but not least, we have the Hyper Beam, which literally makes Samus into a god. For movement enhancements, there's the High Jump Boots, there's the Speed Booster, which allows Samus to move very quickly. There's also a Grappling Beam, which is mostly used for swinging from ledge to ledge. The best upgrade in my opinion though is the Space Jump, which allows Samus to jump repeatedly in the air. In combination with that, there's the iconic Screw Attack, which allows Samus to damage enemies when using the Space Jump. One upgrade that I thought was brilliant was the X-Ray Scope, which allows a player to analyze the environment for secrets. It really shows us how much care and attention was put into making this game. Now, on the flip side, most people would assume a game like this wouldn't have optimization issues, but in the second last area of the game, there's actually some slowdowns, which is surprising as this was on the mini SNES. I guess it's a true reproduction, as I remember this issue was also on the original SNES. Another thing that I have to bring up is that the game can be pretty difficult in certain parts, but it's similar to Dark Souls. You really appreciate the game once you have a thorough understanding of the mechanics. The more you prepare, the more likely you'll succeed. Similar to an RPG, really. One thing that Super Metroid and Dark Souls have in common is that both games have continuity breaks, which allow you to beat the game a lot quicker than you normally would think. If you go through the usual rigmarole, the game can take anywhere from 3 to 10 hours, but speedrunners have now optimized the game and they can now beat it in under an hour, which is insane. But the beauty of it is, the more skilled you are, the faster you go. 2 examples of this are the Shine Spark and the Wall Jump. In the case of the Wall Jump, you can actually traverse a vertical wall by jumping back and forth on the same wall if you're fast enough. With the Shine Spark, it's a bit different. You can't quite do it right off the bat. You have to wait till you get the Speed Booster. Once you get it and you're in mid-sprint, you can actually stop and Samus will glow. You can jump vertically, 45 degrees, or horizontally. And this can let us get access to items we normally wouldn't get until we have the Space Jump. And that gives us a big advantage against certain bosses. One thing I think that shows how well Super Metroid is designed is that it doesn't tell you how to do everything, but there are hints which teach you special abilities. Some examples are the High Jump, Ice Beam, Shine Spark, and Wall Jump. I love that the Shine Spark and Wall Jump are taught by local animals, which act as friends to Samus. One thing that I love about Super Metroid is the unique map. The top area of the map is called Criteria, but within that there's a small area called the Wreck Ship, and it's spooky as heck.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Beneath Criteria there are 2 areas. The first is called Brinstar. It functions as a kind of forest area. Adjacent to that, there's a water area called Meridia. Beneath the 2 of these, there's an area called Norfair. Norfair is like a lava and caves area. It has 2 parts to it, very well designed. The last area of the game is called Turian. It's kind of a more robotic feel to it, still a very cool way to end the game. Let's talk about the weapons of Super Metroid. We have beams, missiles, super missiles, power bombs, the grapple beam, and the screw attack. To be honest, a lot of these weapons are very similar, but thanks to tight controls, all of them are quite a bit of fun. I have to mention this, but for early 1994, these graphics were stellar. The only game that is remotely comparable in my mind would be Sonic or Donkey Kong Country, but for me, it's the style of this game which makes it shine. Every enemy looks spectacular. There's wall critters, flying critters, bouncy critters, even bouncier critters, swimming critters, mining critters, ghost critters, dragon critters, and wannabe Metroids, which are described as failed clones. Then there's actual Metroids. There's space pirates, which come in vanilla, mint, caramel, strawberry, and for the adventurous, extra strength.
Nope.
And of course, we have to talk about the bosses, but before we get into them, I have to mention there's no health bar for the bosses in Super Metroid. Really, it just comes down to the color. At the start, they'll have a certain color to them, and as you do more damage, the color palette will change, which is brilliant. The first real boss that we encounter is Torizo, and it's a statue that comes alive after you get the Morph Ball bombs. After that, we fight the Spore Spawn, which basically moves its head around a small area. Every once in a while, it'll open up its head and it'll have a core. You have to attack that. Honestly, this boss is very boring. We then move into our first major boss battle, who is Kraid. He is huge and towering. The only way to damage him is if you shoot a missile at his head. He'll then open his mouth, where you can actually do real damage. Kind of the theme for these first couple bosses is they have to open their mouths. We then travel into Norfair, where we fight Crocomire. He's kind of the same idea. He has to open his mouth, shoot missiles into his mouth, it does damage. However, you have to move him backwards to a unsecure floor, so he'll drop into the lava and die.
Rated E for everyone.
After this, we travel to the wrecked ship, where we fight Phantoon, and this is my least favorite boss in the game. Rather than having a mouth to open and be damaged, he has an eyeball, but he turns invisible half the boss fight, and his attacks are super cheap. He's a dick. We then go to Meridia, where we fight Bot Woon. He's kind of the same idea. Once he shows his head, you can shoot it and do damage, but this is a much easier boss fight. We then fight Dragon, who's the main boss of Meridia, and I have to say this is a really cool boss fight. When he grabs you, you can then use your grapple beam to attach to a nearby electrical beam, and it'll fry you and Dragon. Really cool gimmick. We then make our way down to Lower Norfair, where we fight the last major boss, who is Ridley. And I really love this fight. He has tons of health, and it's a good slog. There is a final boss after this, but we'll wait until we get into the plot. Speaking of which, let's get into the plot. Please be aware there are spoilers ahead. This came out in 1994, what the fuck am I? Never mind. As the game opens, we see the events of Metroid 2, where Samus forms a bond with the last Metroid and drops it off at a laboratory. Shortly after Samus departs, she receives a distress signal from the lab. Samus returns to see the scientists have been slaughtered. Please note this game is E for everyone. 6-year-old me was definitely put off by this. To make things worse, Ridley kidnaps the last Metroid and sets the lab to self-destruct. Samus then manages to escape to her ship and tracks Ridley back to Planet Zebes. After Samus arrives, the plot really doesn't go much further, other than Samus trying to hunt down the Metroid. We kill the 4 major bosses: Kraid, Phantoon, Dragon, and Ridley. After dispatching Ridley, we find the Metroid capsule, but no Metroid. We then head to Turian, where the statue used to guard the entrance descends after defeating each major boss. As we enter the area, we find cloned Metroids, which are a serious threat, and must be frozen to be killed. A little later on, we enter a room where every creature has been turned into sand. We then witness a massive Metroid dispatch an invincible creature. The Super Metroid then turns to Samus and begins to suck her dry. Just before Samus is killed, the Metroid realizes who she is, and immediately stops. Realizing its a mistake, the Metroid moves away from Samus, allowing her to regain her health and refill her ammo. Samus then moves to take on the final boss, who is Mother Brain. It's right out of the original Metroid. Unfortunately for us, after we defeat her first form, Mother Brain takes on her new form. No matter how hard we try, we cannot defeat the new form of Mother Brain. We then have a scripted event where Mother Brain almost finishes off Samus. The Super Metroid then intervenes and incapacitates Mother Brain and regenerates Samus' health back to full. Just as the Metroid finishes saving us, Mother Brain kills it. The corpse then descends onto Samus and imbues her with the Hyper Beam. We then proceed to annihilate Mother Brain.
お前はもう死んでいる。何？もうは匠でギゼブ！
Once she's defeated, we have no time to celebrate. We have to escape the planet before it explodes. Before we can leave though, we have to save our friends which helped us earlier in our adventure. I should mention this is optional, but if you didn't save the animals, it messes up the continuity of the sequel. You've been warned. We then make it to our ship and escape planet Zebes before it explodes. Once it goes, we get to see a small little speck get away, showing that the animals managed to get away just in time. For a game from 1994, this plot was pretty goddamn good. It did so much with so little. It was extremely unique back in the day to have a good game that had an interesting plot. So, in summary, the gameplay is amazing, the game's design was iconic, and looking back, I can't help but gush about how much I enjoy this game. There's a reason people are still speedrunning it today. I would have to give Super Metroid an A+, and I think everyone should give it a shot. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate you all watching to the end of the video. And lastly, but most importantly, I hope you all have a great day. This is why I'm not a doctor.